Who's haven't been relieving pressure? I see they've been missed passes.
The execution not quite there, not as sharp as you'd like it to be.
Steal the puck here and try to spring Tippett again. He's got it. Oh, and Tippett in on goal again. The backhander, he scores! Persistence pays off for Owen Tippett. And his drought is over, and this game is tied at 1-1.
Great job by Forster to intercept that play in the defensive zone. And look at this backhand. I mean, you got pressure coming down on you. He tried it at the forehand before, keeps it to the bat, and now as a goaltender, you're thinking, no way is he going to backhand this puck in. At some point, you're...
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. Yes, it is your host, Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast. It is an O&B special today. We're brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And before we get with our panelists, because Dan and Chef are off, that we're taping this or recording it, showing my age there, let's also remind you that we are brought to you by Jim's South Street. Yes, Jim's is back. 40 years of the finest cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition down there at 400 South Street. So when you have to have the best, go to Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And without any further ado, from thefourthperiod.com, and now with the TFP Monday Mix podcast with his buddy Dave Pagnotta, this is Anthony DiMarco. How are you, man?
Not too bad, Isaiah. Good to be back on here with you, and we have some things to talk about before I guess silly season officially gets underway.
Yes. We're kind of like the calm before the storm. I do appreciate you making it to the show today. Matvei Michkov, since a few weeks ago when we were told that the relationship with Rotenberg and Michkov was good, but they would have some possibility that Matvei would come to Philadelphia, and there would be a determination by the end of June, which of course, Anthony, coincides with the NHL draft that's coming up on the 28th and 29th. It seems like everybody's, whether it's Anthony Sanfilippo or whether it's the Russian Sport Express reporter Alexei Shevchenko, that's only this week, it seems like it's 50-50 chance that Matvei could be here opening the season. Do you hear anything different?
No, I think we're all kind of in the same boat. Like, I think the Flyers are hoping. I think that they've been working some back channels to get Matvei Michkov over here. But at the end of the day, it really is out of their hands. Like, not only are you dealing with his agent in North America, you're dealing with his agent and representation over in the KHL, who are trying to figure out a way to get him out early from this contract. And like, look, we all want to find out exactly what everyone knows, but unless you have concrete sources overseas in Russia, which is as hard to do as anything nowadays, it's really tough. Like, even people I speak to within the organization semi-regularly are left in the dark on this. So there's a lot of hope. They're doing the most they can, but at this point in time, it really is just kind of a wait and see approach. And hopefully they could find a way to get Matvei Michkov over here.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem that the bridge is there, that if it doesn't work out at the beginning of this year, if the KHL season ends early, regardless of where Matvei is coming from, whether it's CSKA or he's back in Sochi, and there's availability for him to come to Philadelphia, that could be an alternate scenario where he still will be coming over early.
Yeah, I mean, it's unforeseen waters, right, or uncharted waters. Unless you are the Philadelphia Flyers, who seem to be getting pretty accustomed to having to deal with Russian circumstances, like obviously with Ivan Fedotov, obviously with Alexei Kolosov. They're getting a lot of experience on how to deal with Russians and the extenuating circumstances that get over there. So it feels like it's not like a black or white situation. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of different directions where this thing could go. But it does seem, I guess, cautiously positive as of right now. Like, you don't want to get your hopes up too much here. But obviously, if you're someone who tracks the Flyers, covers the Flyers, is a fan of the Flyers, this is like the golden goose, right? This is the thing, or the guy rather, that is going to make this rebuild all worth it in the end, especially with Cutter Gauthier no longer being in the picture. Is he going to come over here and save everything? Of course not, but he's certainly going to make it more exciting, and has the potential to be the best player and the best talent this team has had since Claude Giroux, certainly in his prime, and maybe even since Eric Lindros 25 years ago.
Yep, I don't think that's an overstatement, but we do have to emphasize the word potential. So moving on to the presser that happened this week with Dan Hilferty and Keith Jones, I don't think it really added a lot to the news cycle. There obviously were a lot of positive vibes there, and that's good. The consistency in the message and the commitment and saying the same things that they said when they took over. It appears like they're sticking with the plan, and the fans are more in touch with the team and have a better, outlook, and seem to be re-upping the season tickets, and things are going about as well as you could expect for a team that teased us last year and then fell out of the playoffs at the very end.
You rewind the clock 20 odd months ago, and there was no more trust between the fan base and the team. And I mean, you could lie that at the feet of Chuck Fletcher, who did a poor job at the end with his messaging, along with his hockey decisions. You could lie that at the feet of how Comcast was delegating responsibilities at the top of the organization, whether that be Val Camillo, who I think, to her credit, did a better job towards the end, or Dave Scott, who really was an absentee owner and let this thing completely go sideways under Hextall and Chuck Fletcher. And I think that when John Tortorella came in and you had him saying one thing, Fletcher saying one thing, Dave Scott saying another, there was a lot of miscommunication and a lot of gray area. Nobody really knew what the Flyers were doing. Now, I think that in retrospect, we could look at the last calendar year of Chuck Fletcher from March 2022 to March 2023, and save for the Tony DeAngelo debacle, he really did every move that, I guess I would ask you, Isaiah, save for the Tony DeAngelo thing, everything he did post-Claude Giroux trade pretty much hinted that it was a rebuild, retool of sorts.
Yeah, I just remember that, there was a point at which there was still a discussion, that contrast, and maybe I'm getting my sequence or chronology wrong, that you have Twits out there saying, that we got to tear this down to the, how did he put
studs.
The studs or whatever. And Fletcher's still out there. Well, we're only 4 or 6 points out of a playoff spot. So I think it wasn't until wasn't it like January of 23 or something?
It was really unfortunate right to the end, and I think Fletcher did a very poor job in his messaging, which is weird because I think that early on in his stint as Flyers GM, he did a good job, but I think a lot of what he had to do at the end was the fact that he didn't know how to fix it, and Dave Scott was a bigger issue than people realize. And I think what we've seen from Dan Hilferty, who, look, I'm not going to sit here and say he's God's gift to ownership or the second coming of Ed Snyder, But what I like about Dan Hilferty is that he's delegated responsibilities properly. He's not telling his hockey people that, no, we need to make the playoffs. We need to do this. He's not relying on the opinions of, Bob Clark and Paul Holmgren and Bill Barber. And not to say that we should chastise those guys. They were just doing what was asked of them. But when that is your brain trust, I think that in and of itself is a problem. So I think what we've seen from Hilferty and Keith Jones, who have really taken on the responsibility of one part of Fletcher's job and Dave Scott, is just a united front and saying, like, look, this is not going to be anything monumental. It's not a major news dump. I think a lot of people were expecting maybe a major announcement, but as one person said to me a few hours before the presser, it's just, quote, a lot of fluff. But I think just the fact that they're willing to, from an ownership perspective, once again, sit there in front of the beat reporters and be super transparent and consistent in the messaging goes a long way. Because even for people who, let's say, disagree with the team's organizational direction, I think there is a certain amount of respect that comes with it, that at least they're being consistent with their messaging and they're not hiding from it at all.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, what was most infectious that, in that presser was the enthusiasm and positive vibes that came out of it. There wasn't a lot of news. There are some particulars with relationships they have with the Phillies and a new sports complex and all that. But, that's all stuff to be announced. And right now it doesn't have an effect on a lot of the things that the fans are concerned about right now. But what would be and would have an effect would be some of the issues that Danny Briere is going to talk about and has spoken with recently with Jackie Spiegel over at the Inquirer. And I thought there were some interesting nuggets in there, particularly, Anthony. It seems like the Flyers want Erik Johnson back, come hell or high water, to play another like veteran defenseman, Mark Stahl kind of role. And I'm just curious, looking at their depth chart, what does this mean? Not so much for players like York or Sanheim or Sealer or Drysdale, but for Zamula and Ginning, Ristolainen, Ronnie Attard, who seems to be an afterthought. And of course, Emil Andre, who they may think, well, he needs another year, but what if he flashes in camp? It seems like there's a lot to sort out here.
Well, I think with Mark Stahl, and this, I can't say this with 100% certainty, but just my vibe from how things played out is that he wanted to play. Mark Stahl was a guy who was playing a consistent role with the Florida Panthers in 2023, last year around this time. And then all of a sudden he was being sat even when the team was down 3 defensemen late in the season. But I think that if you find a guy like Erik Johnson, a former first overall pick, a guy who's won a Stanley Cup and in his day was probably one of the better shutdown defenders in the NHL, if you could come to kind of an agreement with him to say, are you okay being a 7-8 consistently? I don't see the harm in it personally. I thought that maybe that it was contingent on Ristolainen being moved, but as I tweeted today, I don't think that there's any correlation between the two. I fully expect Rasmus Ristolainen to be back with the Flyers, at least to start next year, because his value needs to be built back up. I think it was going in the right direction before he was injured, but obviously 3 years left at $5.1 million is still kind of a hurdle for some teams for a guy that I think we could all kind of agree is more or less a number 5 third pairing shutdown defenseman, which is a major step up from where he was 2 years ago. But again, it's a $5 million ticket. And I think that with Johnson, they liked the way that he paired with Igor Zamula. You saw some of the injury concerns with Jamie Drysdale, who is a right shot guy. And besides Drysdale and Ristolainen, they don't have another consistent right shot on their main roster. Yes, Travis Sanheim is more or less completely transitioned over to the right side, but you still don't want to be left with having to force a guy on the left side to play the right. And maybe if you could have Johnson as your number 7 or 8 to tag in if a Drysdale is missing, or more specifically, if a Ristolainen is missing, I don't see the harm in it. I think that Ginning and Zamula are going to be fighting for that number 6 spot. Personally, I like Ginning more. I think that I see more of a path to a consistent NHL role rather than Zamula. I think Zamula's had his shot, and while I think maybe the ceiling has been higher at times, I think like there's just so many times you could go back to the well with him. But if you're pairing him with Ristolainen on third pair, maybe you want his puck moving skills as opposed to Ginning, who would kind of be a redundant pair to Ristolainen. But maybe that would be a good solid third option, defensively responsible. And as for Ronnie Attard, I mean, I've heard mixed reviews about how he did in Lehigh. I admittedly did not watch the playoffs, but I heard that he wasn't overly impressive. In his stint with the Flyers, I thought he had some flashes of really good play. But then there were some games where I'm just like, man, this guy is a complete disaster. Like bad Braden Coburn level type of plays, but without the consistency and the ceiling that Braden Coburn had when he was with the Flyers. So, I mean, with Ronnie Attard, I think he's the type of guy that his type of play doesn't really fit with being a third pair guy. It feels like it's either going to have to click in a top four role or not at all. And right now, there's no path for him to be a top four guy. And even long term, I don't think there's a path to be a top four guy because theoretically, even if Sanheim is moved eventually or transitions back to the left, along with Drysdale, you're going to have Oliver Bonk there. So, I mean, for me, the only path for Attard to be a long-term fixture here would be on a third pair, but I just don't think his game is trustworthy enough for him to be in that role consistently.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, that'll be a situation worth watching. And as the trade talk and activity heats up, his name could be included in one of those deals. And it brings me to that subject of dealing with the cap. And I guess this is an overall question. I do have specifics that I did want to ask you about. Is there going to be a moment where the fans say, hey, well, I didn't see that coming, or wow, I didn't expect that? Is there a chance that could happen outside of the framework of Michkov, that they could make a trade? It would have to be in a trade. It can't be a UFA. They just don't have the space. But I think if there seems to be a contradiction in, hey, we want to make progress. Yeah, we don't necessarily want to tread water. But then again, New Jersey is going to be better this year. They're going to get a goalie, and our points and standings may not be what they were last year, and we might actually be as good, if not better, a team. It's like, how do they reconcile that with the needs they have and the cap space that is obviously at a premium at this particular juncture?
For me, the one critique that I would have with Danny Briere and Keith Jones is that they're one move short of really putting the staple on this being a full rebuild. Because I think Danny Briere hit a home run on his first trade with Ivan Provorov. And I think a lot of people still to this day thought that was an absolutely amazing move. Now, I could tell you that had it not been for Hockey Canada, there would have been a second move, and that would have been Carter Hart. I've spoken with league executives as early as last week that told me that was one of the guys that the Flyers were trying to move off of. Like, you look at a team like Carolina, I would suspect that was one of the teams that they were trying to dangle Carter Hart to. And then you see that they were trying to move off of Sanheim last year. And I could tell you that would have probably brought them one, if not two more first-round picks over the next couple of years had that trade gone through. But even though some extenuating circumstances happened, like the Hockey Canada stuff, or that Torrey Krug refused to waive his no-trade clause, the end result is still the same, that the Flyers have only really made one massive move, or maybe two if you count the Sean Walker stuff that brought in an additional first-round pick, but that was kind of just like a subsequent move or like a spin-off of the Provorov move. Right. They've only made that one major move, albeit an excellent one, that's resulted in 2 first-round picks, that has really said, like, this is a rebuild. Now, you could look at a Travis Konechny as the prime option for that. I mean, Scott Laughton is a guy that I think could have netted them a first-round pick last year around this time if they really wanted to pull the trigger. But I think that's what the fans are waiting for, a move to just once again affirm that they're doing this the right way. The other part about this is that kind of argues against that point is that the one thing under Chuck Fletcher and by proxy Brent Flair, who's still here, that happened is that they kind of reloaded on the fly with some promising young players. No stars, but promising young players like Tippett, like Brink, like Forster, like Cam York, a guy like Cutter Gauthier who parlayed to a Jamie Drysdale. You have some good goalies in the system. So it wasn't like this was a team with a bunch of vets and no promising young talent. No, there's a good foundation here with good young players, but obviously you're missing that high-end talent. So I think for the Flyers brass, they're trying to evaluate what veterans to keep, but which ones to try and bolster the existing talent. The hockey trade that you already mentioned is one that I know they're keeping their ears to the ground for. Obviously, this is low-hanging fruit, but they really do want to find a centerman, and they're trying to exhaust all options to do so. But I think that it has to come in a way of a hockey trade or a major trade of one of your guys to kind of mimic what you saw happen with Ivan Provorov last year around this time. I think it was actually a year ago today that trade happened. So will that happen eventually? Yes, I do believe that, because I do think you're either going to see a big hockey trade or then move a vet for a haul, relatively speaking. But I'm just not sure when that is, because I do think that the Flyers still see this at the early stages of the rebuild, and they're perfectly comfortable playing the long game here and waiting for the right move to come along.
Okay. So that begs the question. Today, it was further substantiated that Buffalo is offering up that number 11 pick for a top 6 forward. They're stacked at center, so you'd have to think that they're looking for a winger, someone who's established as a good player. And of course, 2 Flyers kind of fit that bill. One is Joel Farabee, and the other, of course, is Travis Konecny. Also, Buffalo has a lot of young center depth with Yuri Kulich, Noah Oslan, even Matthew Savoy. Not even going to get into Peyton Krebs, who I think is a really low ceiling player. But
yeah, I agree.
It's low hanging fruit with that number 11 pick. The Flyers have 12. It gives them an opportunity to draft 2 really good players that are still within the range of what's good in this draft. Is that?
I think it's absolutely. I think it's absolutely something that they're looking at. Not to cut you off there.
Yeah, sure.
I think that if they could find a way to jump into another pick in the first round or move up from that Florida pick, there's something they would certainly look at. I've had one person suggest to me, Lawton and the Florida pick for that 11th. I mean, if Buffalo's looking for a top 6 forward, I don't know if Scott Lawton really fits that mold. Joel Farabee is certainly a name that has been out there. I think that's their biggest trade chip that they're looking to swap. I'm not sure if Joel Farabee is the guy that they would flip for a first-round pick, or if they're looking for like a centerman. Like, I could tell you that there were talks with Marty Necas involving Joel Farabee. That was the guy that the Flyers ideally would have liked to involved if there was a path to Marty Necas, which I don't get the sense that there is at this point in time for the Flyers.
Right.
But I do think that 11th pick is something the Flyers would like to look at, because there are some centermen at that point on the board, a Consta Hellenius, a Berkeley Catton, although I don't get the sense Catton's the type of guy they're looking at. A guy like who has a high offensive ceiling in a Cole Yzerman. But then you look at the defensive side of things, whether it be a Yakimchuk or the guy on the back end from the London Knights. I forget his name. The big defenseman who plays for London. His name's Dickinson. There you go. Who maybe Sam Dickinson. So maybe one of the defensemen would be the best player available. But do you really want to go defense when there are some good offensive options, specifically down the middle on the board at that stage? So if they were able to get another pick in that range, I think it would be something that they would seriously look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to go best player available. And then if they get what they want with that first pick, depending on where they're picking again, they might sway a little towards position of need. And right now, they're open to get, I mean, if T.J. Ginla was there and he's projected as a winger and he's the best guy, they would take him. But if that was 11 and they also had 12, then they might slant towards the center with their next pick. It seems to be they want to go BPA more or less as a rule, but with that first pick, they don't want to blow it. So they're going to go BPA no matter what. But it would seem it's tough when you're in that spot and you really like a player, they're going to get the guy they like, and maybe it breaks some of those rules. Listen, before I let you go, Anthony, there also was a rumor that Brian Wiseman, a power play coach for San Jose, is drawing interest as the Sharks are looking for a new coach and that presumably a new staff. His Sharks power play was in the top 10 from February on, and it's not like they had tons of talent there. And this is just screaming for the Flyers to take a look in an area that wouldn't affect their cap.
Yeah, for sure. Like, obviously, like, I'll be honest, I think that the whole power play talk, specifically around Rocky Thompson, gets overblown a bit at times, because I do think power play mainly comes down to talent. And I don't think that the Flyers have any great power play type of guys. Like, even a Travis Konechny, who's far and away their best forward at this stage, he's not really like a power play stalwart. Like, in my mind, his ceiling would be like a more skilled Brendan Gallagher. I think Owen Tippett has that potential. Obviously, on the back end, you have Drysdale there, but with his injuries, he was not there as much as you would have liked this season. But as you pointed out, San Jose was far and away the worst team this year, and they had a top 10 power play on the back end of the season. So I think it's something that certainly that the Flyers should look at. I think you see more and more now teams bring in power play consultants. I believe the Blues did that with Brad Richards after they fired Craig Berube, and their power play coach, I believe, is Steve Ott. So bringing in a power play consultant doesn't necessarily take anyone's job away, but just add some reinforcements to bolster the staff. And look, nothing's going to hurt, right? They've been, dead last or close to it for how many years now? And
three
the talent,
years in a row, 30 seconds.
There you go. And look, there's been more than one coach. I think that last year of AV, you had 3 guys run the power play, whether it was Michel Therrien, then it went to Darryl Williams. I think it ended with John Torchetti. So, I mean, this has been a long-standing issue, even when the Flyers had more talented players like Claude Giroux and Ivan Provorov and whatnot. Like, this goes beyond the players. It goes beyond the coaching. It's just been a whole mishmash of a disaster for the better part of 3 years here. So any help will be welcomed here, but I don't think that there's one thing that's going to be the magic touch to fix it all.
No, but I just don't see an excuse why they can't get from 32 to finally like 22. It's
exactly, for sure.
Yeah, after 3 years running. All right, last thing for you, Anthony. We're going to talk about going forward how the Flyers are going to manage the cap. If you had to put the odds on who gets bought out, who doesn't, I mean, some more tidbits from the Inquirer article that I referenced earlier, that it's still on table for players like Atkinson or even Cal Peterson to be a buyout candidate, and it may be leveraged around what happens with trades on draft day and what have you. Do you have you kind of reworked your thinking on who could be a candidate?
Cal Peterson, to me, has continued to be the one guy that they have told me that they're probably going to elect to keep, just because that you could do a lot worse than Cal Peterson as your number 3 option. And I mean, I think that I didn't track him that much in the playoffs in Lehigh, but I think like you could do a lot worse, right? 1 year left, $5 million. You're going to have to go out and get another, albeit cheaper, but another Cal Peterson to play that role with Alexei Kolosov next year, presumably. So why not just bite the bullet, 1 more year at $5 million, and then you could just wash your hands this time next year and recalibrate. Cam Atkinson's different because I think that even arguably more so than the cap relief, I think the roster spot, and more specifically the position he plays, is something that's working against him. Because, like, for me, that spot should go to Bobby Brink. Like, when I look at the Flyers next year, Bobby Brink, assuming that Tyson Forster shifts to left wing full time, which may be possible depending on what happens with Matvei Michkov, but Bobby Brink should be your 3rd line right wing. Maybe that's a long-term solution beside a Sean Couturier of sorts. Maybe the foot speed would be kind of an issue, but something of that ilk. Cam Atkinson, to me, it's just like he's just kind of, from a roster construction standpoint, a pariah. I can make sense of Cal Peterson because you're going to need to plug that hole anyway. You're not going to have to plug the hole of Cam Atkinson. So I haven't heard one way or the other where they're going with Cam Atkinson. It's been a lot more gray in their responses to me on that. But with Cal Peterson, it's more like most likely they're keeping him and they're just going to bite the bullet 1 more year. While with Cam Atkinson, they're still evaluating. But I think Atkinson for the reasons I just mentioned, is more likely than not to get bought out.
Yeah, I think also part of that is look, they like the guy, they respect him, the player. If he wants a chance to get a bigger role somewhere else, they want to accommodate him from that perspective as well. It would seem.
Yeah, exactly. Like, look, he doesn't fit here, unfortunately. He's a good pro, obviously dealt with the injury issues in 22-23. It's nothing personal, but also like, hey, if he was a left wing or a center, you probably just let this go a bit more, honestly. But he's a right wing, and you have Bobby Brink, you have Travis Konechny, you have Tyson Forster, you have Garnet Hathaway. If he comes over, you have Matvei Michkov, you have Samu Tuomola in the minors. Like, it's just a position that they're overloaded at, and it's just something that for me makes a whole lot of sense, and I think the buyout is kind of advantageous as well for the Flyers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to wrap it there for your particular segment. Where can people catch you on social media, and what you got coming up?
So obviously DiMarco25 on X, catch all my stuff at thefourthperiod.com, and obviously every Monday, the podcast TFP Monday Mix with myself and David Pagnotta.
Fantastic. And thanks for doing this, man. You take care.
Yeah, looking forward to it next time, man. Take care.
You too. I think that is all we have for you today. So just a reminder, you can follow the O&B Puckcast on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible. We have a YouTube channel. We also have a Facebook page. Just plug in there for YouTube, O&B Puckcast. We appreciate that when you rate and subscribe. It moves us up the charts for people that are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. We do appreciate that. We just had a 5-star recently. We'll probably get to in our next show. And also, you can follow us on the app known as X at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. Our backup plan is Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And we should be back in about 10 days. We're going to have a big draft preview show with some national draft pundits that I think you're well aware of. So that's something we're looking forward to. And if there's any news in between then, we'll have a special to update you. So until next time, everybody, thanks for listening and take care.